Howdy. So if you have seen one of my videos before, you can probably guess what we're going to be doing today. Random things. I'm going to be going over whatever I feel like. The main theme of this video today is going to be some of the Descendia Arcanes that we got with the old peace update. So I'm mostly going to be going over those, but there is like a bunch of other random stuff in here too that I just thought was interesting that I've been playing with recently. So we're going to try to go through them. Let's get started. Okay, so the first one we're going to be talking about is primary debilitate. So there's a very good video about debilitate in general out already on Dystopia's channel, so I will be linking that down in the description. TLDR for this thing is that basically it only happens once per instance of damage, and that it also triple dips with roar. There's also some sight mechanics with it that are really interesting, so if you want to go watch that video, definitely go give that a look. What I'm going to be focusing on today though is the once per damage instance part of this, because I think there's a lot of like nuance to that statement that I think is important. So I'm going to be demonstrating this with the Quanta Vandal, and we're just going to be showing first a pure electric setup. So this is going to be doing nothing, and then the rest of this is basically just a bunch of status chance and some multi-shot to just make this do a lot of status at once. Because if you look, like the Quanta Vandal is actually a really potent status weapon, right? Like I shoot once, I get 5 electric procs. That's pretty good. It does 2 ticks of damage. There's 12 electric procs, right? So I'm just going to hold down the button here for like roughly 3 seconds, and you'll just see how many status procs this is doing. So you can see we got like about 150 from this. And now I'm going to switch over to a radiation build. Okay, so we're swapped over to pure radiation here with more status chance. So this should, if anything, be proccing more statuses than the previous version. But as you can see, we're getting nowhere near as many status procs. And the reason for that is because if you do multiple like radiation stacks in the same attack, which this weapon definitely is, like you can see, like 1 tick is 8, 1 tick is 5, 1 tick is 8, right? What you need to realize about this is that like basically you're wasting every radiation proc except for the first one. So beam weapons like this that have like beam shotguns, so like the Phage, or the Phantasma, or the Quanta Vandal like this, that have like multiple beams that shoot at a bunch of status all at once, waste a lot of their status if you use debilitate. And so even though you'd kind of expect it to be really good, it ends up not being that good on them. Even though they're like really like they're status monsters. Like here's like an actual build. So this is a Crux setup that I've showed previously in a couple of my videos, just with pure electric. Like you can see that 99% of the damage from this is just in the electric dots. So the fact that this is just much worse with debilitate is kind of disappointing. But the other part of this is that blast specifically is about 10 times less effective than every other status. Because if you're using debilitate and you have blast, it'll only trigger every time it gets to 10 stacks once. So a weapon like this that basically almost instantly procs blast doesn't really mind, sort of. So like we'll only hit blast like every other tick. And so it actually ends up wasting less status than it would otherwise. And you can see in practice that that kind of makes sense too, right? Because we're still getting that electric status that's really, really potent on it, but then we actually do get a good amount of heat and blast, and then you can kind of use this as like a actual blast weapon. That said, I do think the Crux version of this is better, so I'm just going to show you like a quick electric blast setup with debilitate, just so you can see kind of where this sits. Like it's fine. One thing it does have is that it has the innate armor strip from heat that it gets. So in that way, it's kind of interesting. But to me, this is like really not that much better than just using Crux and getting that extra status. So I'll show you the same setup, like the exact same setup, but I'm just going to switch to Crux. Right, like the sheer number of blast procs that we get is much, much higher. So the AoE is much higher. And you can see that it actually killed a lot of the enemies in the center here. Or pushed them so far away that they weren't getting hit by blast anymore. So if you're going to use a beam like weapon like this, especially one that can actually headshot and activate Crux, I would highly recommend Crux over debilitate. So let's talk about what this behavior really means, because I think it's kind of important to sort of explain like why this matters. If you can get headshots and you already have a high status chance, generally Crux's 300% status chance is just going to be more useful, beyond the fact that it has like the extra ammo efficiency and all that nonsense, right? So if you can headshot, definitely use Crux. If you can't headshot, there's like a couple of weapons in the game that just don't headshot that well. There's actually a good argument, in my opinion, for using debilitate. So I'm going to show you another version of a debilitate setup, except this time we're going to be talking about bubonico. And bubonico can technically headshot. Like you can see that if I'm using the primary fire, these headshots can activate Crux, so you can still use like a Crux setup on this. But the altfire is such a good primer that you actually are getting extra statuses from having debilitate on here. So it makes good primers, like already good primers, even better, because now they're getting heat, they're getting cold, they're getting toxin, they're getting electric, right? So in that way, I think this is a really, really good tool just as a primer tool, beyond like the fact that it's good for damage in a lot of ways, right? So something to consider is that if you're using a primer, you can get more statuses from it, which is really sick. This is sort of a hybrid primer, non-primer setup. And I think if you're just using a pure primer setup, you would do something like this. So you'd have Shivering Contagion on here, and then you'd have both the magnetic mod and the radiation mod if you can fit them. Something like this. So this is like a full priming setup. Beyond priming capability, there's a couple of weapons that specifically benefit from debilitate that I think are really interesting. So one of those is actually going to be the Jupiter, of all things. So this is the Scaldra rifle that kind of, it sits in the same class as like the AX-52 sort of. It doesn't have a augment the way that the AX-52 does. But what it does have is its altfire, and its altfire basically procs a ton of corrosive, like to the point where it fully primes enemies. So you can see that like if I shoot this guy, we got so many corrosive procs. Like this guy has 10 corrosive, and then he also got another basically 11 hits because we got 5 elec and 5 toxin there, right? So you can kind of see where this is going. If a weapon already has a force proc like this, debilitate ends up being really, really good because it instantly will end up proccing those extra statuses. I'll show this build here in a second again, but what you really need to know about it is that like it just procs a lot of status. The primary fire is going to work just fine too. You'll just be getting cold instead of corrosive because I have this built for fire or for viral. But really interesting weapon. I think this is probably one of the bigger beneficiaries of debilitate existing. And of course, like because this triple dips on roar, it ends up being really silly once you give it a couple buffs. So let's give that another go, but with like roar and nourish and stuff, just so you can kind of see what the upper end of this looks like. This is before we have any stacks, by the way. I'm like intentionally not going for headshots because the headshots are just going to one-shot it, right? But if you're within this thing's closest range, it's really, really good. Even at the longer ranges, you can see that like this is still getting those extra procs. So it's still getting that triple dip on roar. So really interesting weapon, definitely to give a go if you haven't, with debilitate. Okay, another weapon that I want to talk about real quick is the Basmu. So this is a nothing setup just to kind of demonstrate it. We have electric on the primary fire with a heat radial, and then electric on the held alt fire. So you can see that basically if I go and I shoot these guys, we're getting both heat and elect statuses just naturally, right? Like this weapon's really weird. And then the alt fire here is just entirely elec. You can see that we're getting quite a bit of electric procs. Okay, so the issue with this is that if you're building heat and viral like normal, you'll end up with radiation damage on the primary fire and the primary beam. The only thing that will actually be viral heat here is the radial attack, which sucks. Radiation damage is just not that good of a status effect type in general. It's like a little scuffed as a weapon. Because you can't build viral electric, you can't really build viral heat, so you kind of have to either choose to only do viral damage and then like not have any elemental damage to scale your status procs, or you have to like just build like a raw damage build where you only go into elec and then you just kind of live with the fact that you won't get any heat on the radial attack. Debilitate in a lot of ways fixes this. So what you're looking at here is a pure radiation build. So I have the 60/60 mods in here. I do have a Riven. You can replace this just with crit damage, and this is perfectly fine. So I'll even demonstrate it like this. And then you'll notice that I actually have Elementalist in here too, which is very weird considering that we have radiation damage here. But because of Debilitate, this actually kind of has a use, which is really weird to say, right? Because that's not really how the game used to work. And you can see that like the primary fire is actually doing quite a bit. What I would say is that the alt fire here, not as useful, because what this is doing is, because it's a beam just like the Quanta Vandal or the Phantasma or any of those, it tends to not get as many status procs as it could if you were just building straight for the alt fire. But because it has that triple dip effect on roar, this has been a weapon that I've been using on Rhino and like Noko and Wisp, people who have a lot of ability to like just build a ton of strength and then just have a huge roar. And And you can see that once this thing gets started, because it's multi-co, and because we're getting so many statuses between Nourish and the radiation damage, this actually ends up being pretty decent on the primary fire. And even the altfire is like decent too. It turns all of its damage into that status damage, and because Rora's triple dipping, it just ends up killing. So really just a very interesting setup if you're interested in Basmu in general. Another one that I think is kind of interesting, I don't think this build is good, but if you're looking for good builds, you're on the wrong channel. We're going to be talking about Coda Bassocyst. So one of the interesting things about the Bassocyst in general is that it does have an altfire that does exist. So you can see it shoots out like a bunch of these projectiles. And actually each of these projectiles will force proc magnetic. And then on top of that, they do have a status chance. And so if you give it corrosive or something also, you can just make this thing just shit out a lot of combined statuses for debilitate, which ends up being pretty interesting, right? Because it's like a weird auto lock primer type of thing. And I think probably what I'll end up doing with this in general is using it as like a low level auto fire, like OcuCore setup type of thing. Where you just run around and you look at the ground so you don't teleport to anybody to kill them. Of course, you can teleport to an enemy and just mercy kill for the multi-shot bonus, but you really don't need to. You can just kind of stare at the ground and then like fire and it'll auto-seek targets. Again, would I recommend this? Probably not. The main reason I wouldn't recommend it is because it takes basically 10 ticks for it to get to the point where the status is like actually capped out and you start doing the damaging status. And it will kill like once you get to that point, but it is really fun. I think this is a very weird way to use the weapon. So just kind of interesting. And it does kill if you give it a roar. So kind of cool. If people have any other recommendations also for making debilitate do something, definitely like let me know. I'm very interested in this arcane. I think the triple dip on roars are really interesting. So I think there's like a bunch of different setups that you can do with this that are pretty interesting. Okay, let's move on to the next arcane that I think is particularly interesting. And that, of course, is Irradiate. I think people saw this coming. Irradiate's really interesting to me because it's weird. So if you haven't seen this arcane before, basically it's once you get 10 stacks of radiation, you'll deal damage to nearby enemies. So it's sort of like a pseudo blast. It kind of does more damage than blast because it counts elemental damage. But what it's really interesting for, in my opinion, is that it tends to work really well on weapons that either have innate radiation or can start it up really quickly. And so you can see that this Tenet Cycron, which I'm using punch through on to like make more beam chains, is also getting the effect of the radiation chain and ends up being pretty good. So this is one of the interesting ways to use this is just on weapons that already have sort of like chains like this, but that can also stack radiation pretty quickly. So Cycron, I think, would probably be the one I would mostly recommend. I know there's going to be like 30 videos on everybody saying that Kuva Nukor is like the best version. And to be honest, I could see it, but I'm going to actually introduce you to another variation of this that I think is pretty interesting, which is when you prime with radiation and then you just use the weapon standalone. So we're going to use just like a really overpowered weapon in the dual Toxcyst. So this setup I'm going to be showing off here is basically a no radiation irradiate setup. So we have no radiation on this. You'll notice that we have crit chance and stuff, but for the most part, this is like just a very normal Toxcyst setup. So you can use this straight out. There might be better builds. I don't really play Toxcyst that often. So the interesting thing about it to me is that if you are playing somebody like Nyx who auto primes like 10 radiation really, really quickly, you can kind of just use Irradiate separately. Let's just show Toxcyst killing some stuff. How's that sound? Because this weapon is good. And when you give it a 5-meter AoE that also procs blast, it's double good. So really, like, this should be the first thing that you think of when you think of this arcane is like, oh, I can just put this on Nyx and then it kills everything. Because she gives like 200% crit chance on irradiated stuff with her passive and like already does a lot of damage. So very interesting setup like this. Another thing that I think a lot of people will consider is like a Titania setup. This is just like a first attempt at a Titanium setup, so don't like take this too seriously. But you can see that we've basically traded all damage for blast and radiation. I even have punch through on here so that we can hit more targets, so we can proc more radiation on stuff. And then the rest of this is just kind of like status chance. On Titania herself, I'm actually using Zada's Whisper so that the blast procs will double hit. And then on top of that, we just have like a very normal strength setup. One thing that I would also point out here is that we're actually using Universal Fallout. Shout out to Mika for this idea, because this is like infinite energy, basically. So you can basically entirely dump efficiency and this thing will still do just fine energy-wise. So we're going to speed up a whole bunch because we're Titania. And then once this gets to full radiation stacks, you can see that the AoE is just ridiculous, right? To the point where it doesn't even show all the numbers for enemies being hit because there's just too many of them. Is this better than like Zada's Blast normal Titania? Probably not. It's just an interesting idea. Because like you're giving Titania more AoE because she sure doesn't need more damage. So just something worth considering. One of the other targets that I think is really interesting for Irradiate is actually Dante. The first thing that I want you to consider is the fact that Wordwarden, his third variant of his ult right here, summons basically a copy of his exalted weapon that just follows you and all of your friends around, which makes it do damage. This is, just in general, this is like a really strong ability. Having a second weapon out at the same time makes your damage much higher. Surprise, surprise. So that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on here. And I'm going to just show you like a very normal Dante build first, just to kind of show you like how the book normally works. And what you'll see is that like I'll shoot this front target and then the ball will split and then hit 4 other people, right? The reason that this is important is because Wordwarden itself works that way too. So if I press 2 and then 3 and then 4 here to summon this book that flies around and follows me, when I shoot at enemies, it does the same thing. So you can see that it shoots and then it splits the 4 projectiles out. And then those projectiles will seek and hit other targets. Well, it turns out that every projectile split that Wordwarden does will be affected by Irradiate. And so if I go and I prime a bunch of enemies with radiation with like the Basmu or some other weapon, what you'll see is that it's now hitting like quintuple the targets, right? Like each of the splits have a 5-meter AoE around them, which is really good because compared to a lot of other weapons where like the AoE is like very targeted and local, this one will actively seek out targets and do that 5-meter AoE, which is really, really strong. And the version that I just showed you right now is like not even the strongest version. So I'm going to switch to like a primer setup. So here's the bubonico that I was showing with debilitate earlier. Just does a bunch of status basically, also primes radiation. And what you'll see is that if I just jump up in the air like this and then I prime a bunch, Wordwarden will start going off and immediately kill everything. Remember, like my bubonico does do single target damage, but it doesn't when you're using the altfire. So you can use like literally any primer in the game for this. So like here's just the epitaph, for example. So this is just a pure irradiation primer setup for epitaph, and you'll see the exact same behavior here. So if I press 2, 3, 4 again to summon this, as soon as we get to 10 radiation stacks, you can see that Wordwarden is just going to start killing things, right? Just a really, really good setup for like having your book do the damage, sort of. Very interesting. So something worth considering, like if you're interested in playing Dante, but like you don't want to play him the normal way, Irradiate is like a very, very good option. As for a full build for Dante, this is kind of what I would recommend. I haven't really optimized this that much. So if you want to change something around here, I think that's perfectly okay. Main thing to consider is that Universal Fallout is just a ton of energy. So you can do this instead of efficiency, just like we were doing on the Titania version. And then on top of that, here is the Irradiate build for Noctua. One thing to note here, Noctua will actually target headshots if you hit something in the head, which is why we have Acuity. Multi-shot and fire rate don't affect the Wordwarden version of Noctua, so like the flying book, basically. But if I like charge up and do a headshot like this, you can see that it's actually targeting headshots. When it's capable of doing so. Yeah, you can see headshot. Headshot. Like it'll always attempt to aim at the head if it can. So I highly recommend Acuity if you're just using any like normal weapon. If you're using something like the Basmu to both prime and kill, I think this is a really good option too, because Basmu has its altfire, which will instantly radiation prime everything. And then you can use that on top of the primary fire to kill. And together, damage. So, very fun setup. Definitely worth using if you're interested in it.
Okay, let's do thank yous. This is going to be a little bit more scuffed than usual because I forgot to record a lot of the actual openings of these, but I opened them all, so thank you guys. Crispy Jibs, thank you for the formal bundle. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the Run and Gun Nova build. No problem. Has it Teal, thank you for the formal bundle. Appreciate it. And then Duty, this guy just always spams me with stuff. So thank you for the Titania skin and the 5 formal bundles. Dude, he cracks me up. Kylar, thank you for the Omniformal bundle. Actually, huge deal. Yeah, both of these are really expensive, so thank you guys so much for that. Thank you, Skig, for the one forma. Appreciate you. Faded, thank you for the one forma. Savant, thank you for the drone. And then Duty gave me more forma, and then he gave me the riot. This was for I was on stream. We were trying to grab this, and then he just gifted it to me like between missions. Livid, thank you for the 6 forma bundles. Totally not a forma bribe to stream more. I'll probably do another stream like next weekend or something. We'll see. I haven't really decided, so don't hold me to that. Nicole, thank you for the Omniformal bundle too. Thank you, really appreciate it. I really hope the riot does more than 10 base damage. I do have some other builds that I've been sitting on for quite a bit that I want to make a video on at some point, but nobody hold me to that because I'm lazy. I was gonna do a bigger thing for 10k too, but then we completely smashed it, and I don't have any way to like live up to that amount of hype. So I guess we'll just do another stream. I think probably what I'll do in the future is that anytime that I like hit a big sub goal or something, I'll do a stream. Just because like I feel like I owe you guys something for for showing up and watching my stuff, because to be honest, I like really started this YouTube channel for myself. Like I just wanted to yap into the void. And then people kept showing up and like liking my stuff. So thank you guys for hanging out. I really do appreciate it. So yeah, let's call it here. Thank you guys for watching.